Welcome to Giving an Answer, the show dedicated to defending the historic Christian faith. I am your host, H.C. Felder, and today the topic is science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. And I have with me to discuss that Dr. Frank Turek. Let me tell you about Dr. Turek. He has a master's degree in public administration. He also has a master's and a doctorate in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary, my alma mater. He teaches apologetics at Southern Evangelical Seminary as well. He's also the founder of Impact Apologetics Ministry. He's the author of 2 award-winning books, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which I think is the best apologetics books, bar none. And also Legislating Morality, Is It Wise, Is It Legal, or Is It Possible? He's also appeared on a number of TV shows, The O'Reilly Factor, Hannity and Combs, Politically Incorrect, Fox News, CBS News, and he also has his own weekly talk show called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist on DirecTV. Welcome to the show, Dr. Turek.
And now we're out of time. Sorry.
Welcome to the show.
Who wrote that, man? That's crazy.
I wanted to give you the accolades, but next time I'm gonna have to.
We got to tell them about our website, crossexamined.org.
Yes.
That's
tell
the
us
one.
about that.
Well, that's where we go to college campuses and present. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Because 75% of kids walk away from the church once they leave the home. And one of the reasons, Harold, is because intellectually they don't know why Christianity is true.
Right.
And we give them evidence that it is indeed true based on our book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And they think science, by the way, opposes the Christian worldview. And in fact, I think it actually supports it.
Right. I agree with that 100%. So since I've spent so much time introducing you, let's get right to it.
All right.
Exactly what is science?
Well, the word science means knowledge.
Okay.
But there's no agreed upon definition of science when it comes to the natural world, believe it or not. If you ask different people to define science, they'll kind of punt because it's hard to define, actually. What is it? The founder of modern science, the study of the natural world kind of science, is Francis Bacon, who said that true knowledge is knowledge by causes. In other words, science is a search for causes. When you're trying to do science, or when you're doing science, you're trying to find what particular cause caused a particular effect. Okay?
Right.
Now, normally the scientific method requires you to do observation and repetition and make sure that what you're observing is true cause and effect relationships. So science, loosely defined, is a search for causes. And the problem is that many people who say they're scientists don't understand that science, like just about every other discipline, in fact, indeed every other discipline, is built on philosophy. You can't do science without philosophy, and unfortunately, a lot of scientists don't understand that. In fact, Einstein himself said the man of science is a poor philosopher.
Now, okay, it's based on philosophy. Mm-hmm. What do you mean exactly? What type of philosophical concepts make up science?
For example, the law of causality. You can't prove through science the law of causality. You have to assume the law of causality, that everything that comes to be has a cause. You have to assume that in order to do science. You can't prove that by an experiment.
Right.
You have to assume it's true in order to do an experiment. Also, the laws of logic, the laws that we use to communicate, the laws we use to think, you have to assume that they exist before you do science. You can't prove them by some sort of experiment. You have to assume they're true before you do the experiment.
Right.
The same thing is true with data. When you look at data, you have to interpret the data. That involves reasoning skills. For example, to look at biology for a second, you always hear that the evolutionary worldview is somehow proven by science. But the data doesn't tell you explicitly whether evolution is true. For example, if you look at a biological creature, say a cell in a biological creature, it doesn't say made by Yahweh, or it doesn't say made by Yahweh in there, right? It doesn't say made by God. Neither does it say evolved from the first one-celled creature without intelligent intervention. You have to make an interpretation. That involves reasoning skills. That involves philosophy. In fact, when you get a PhD, the PH stands for philosophy. It doesn't matter what the field is, philosophy of biology, philosophy of physics, philosophy of psychology, philosophy of history, philosophy of whatever. Undergirding every academic discipline is philosophy. So if I had to mention to people or recommend to people what they ought to study if they really want to know truth, it would be philosophy. Now, I don't mean philosophy in the kind of philosophy where we sit around and wonder if we exist. I'm not talking about that kind of philosophy. Right. I'm talking about the philosophy, for example, of the laws of logic is part of philosophy. Ethics are part of philosophy. That's another thing that science can't tell you is what's right and wrong. You can't put honesty in a test tube.
Right.
You know, you heard the whole global warming scandal, the email scandal.
Yeah. Have you been following that?
Well, a couple of years ago, it came out that the people who said that the Earth was warming were hiding data. They were blacklisting people who disagreed with them. They were cherry-picking data. They were fudging results. Now, all that has to do with ethics.
Right.
I just heard on the radio the other day that the people, one of the researchers who found out that a ingredient in red wine lowers cholesterol. Did you hear about this?
I heard the same
thing.
Said
that he fudged all the data.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that there may not be a ingredient in red wine that does lower cholesterol, but it means that this researcher who was trying to find out that he did fudge his data, well, maybe his research is bad. Maybe there's other research that's good that says that.
Right.
But people lie sometimes in order to get the results they want. In fact, I saw a survey, I wrote an article on this. Science doesn't say anything scientists do. People can see it on our website, crossexamine.org, where about a third of researchers admitted that they had fudged data either to get the results they wanted or to keep their jobs or to get grant money or to just get what they were looking for. That's it. And
right,
the third of the researchers out there, and those are just the people that admit it.
Right.
Think about those that don't admit it. What I'm trying to say here, Harold, despite what the common myth is that science is not objective if the scientists are not objective.
And you raised a very good point, because I worked at NASA for 8 years, and there seems to be this conception is that if you want to know the truth, you go to scientists, because supposedly they are objective. They just follow the facts wherever it leads. There's nothing unethical about them, unlike, maybe some Christians or something like that, sure. Because, they're biased. Right. Whereas scientists aren't biased. They just follow the evidence where it takes.
That's not true. Well, some scientists are objective. I don't want to impugn all scientists.
Right.
And some Christians are objective and some are biased, too.
Right.
You have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Exactly.
All I'm trying to say is that all data needs to be interpreted.
Right.
That requires philosophy. Also, what needs to be determined before you do science is what causes will be considered possible before you look at the evidence. I'll give you an example. When it comes to biological creatures and the whole idea of where we came from, was it evolution, was it special creation, intelligent design, whatever. When you look at the data, you know that there's only two types of causes. There's either natural causes from natural forces, or there's non-natural forces. There's only two categories, either natural or it's not. And the non-natural we'd call intelligent causes, right?
Right.
So you got natural and intelligent causes. Intelligent design people are open to both types of causes. When they look at a biological creature, they're open to maybe it was a natural force that did it. And they're also open to maybe there was some intelligence involved that brought this into existence. Many of the atheists, including Richard Dawkins, including Jerry Coyne, including Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, and
now you've debated some of these atheists, haven't you?
I've debated Christopher Hitchens, God rest his soul. He just died recently.
Yeah.
But many of these atheists philosophically rule out intelligent causes before they look at the evidence. They just assume that intelligent causes don't happen. Now, that is a philosophical presupposition that they bring to the evidence before they ever look at the evidence.
Right.
So they've ruled out the only other alternative to a natural cause. Is it any wonder why they always arrive at a natural cause? Is it any wonder why they always say that evolution is the cause? It's a circular argument based on philosophy. It's not based on the data. Now let me add this. Maybe they're right. It's possible they're right that it is evolution.
Right.
But to philosophically rule out the only other alternative is to show you that science doesn't say anything scientists do. They have, the scientist has philosophically ruled out the only other alternative.
Now, why do they do that?
Well, there's a number of motivations for it. I don't know what they all are. Some have admitted they have certain motivations. Like, for example, Thomas Nagel, who teaches at NYU, says he has a cosmic authority problem. What does that mean? He just doesn't want to bow his knee to a creator. He says, not only do I not believe in God, I don't want there to be a God.
Right.
And he says, one of the most troubling things for me is that some of the most intelligent people I know are religious believers. And he says he thinks Dawkins has the same problem. He thought Hitchens had the same problem. They don't want to bow their knee to a creator. You know, the elephant in the room in many of the discussions I have on college campuses about Christianity being true, the elephant in the room, Harold, is morality.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is that they want to reject God because of the perceived morality or the moral constraints that God puts on them.
Yeah, I became an atheist for that very reason. And I've said that before, is that when I can tell you the day I became an atheist. And it was the day, now we both were stationed in the Philippines.
We've both been to the Philippines. I was in the Navy, you were in the Navy?
Yes, and the first day I was in the Philippines and I walked out the gate and I looked around and saw the bars and all the beautiful women, and I knew that belief in a God would conflict with the way I wanted to live my life. So I decided then and there I was not going to believe in a God, and that's how I lived my life until, you know, finally I came to see the light, because it was sort of hard to deny, especially when I would go out at sea and at night when I would look up at the stars. I would know that was bigger than anyone I've ever met in my life. You know, and the only explanation for that could be something way beyond us.
Right.
And that something way beyond us is God.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, so morality is a big part of this. Now, I can't say that this is the motivation for all.
Right.
There was a Darwinist by the name of Richard Lewontin. He teaches at Harvard, and back in 1997, he had a very candid moment when he admitted in the New York Times Review of Books that the reason that many scientists don't believe in miracles and rule out intelligent design in advance is because they don't want a divine foot in the door.
Yeah.
In fact, it is a quote that we cover, and I don't have enough faith to be atheist. He just admits it. He says it's not that the methods and institutions of science compel us to have a materialistic explanation of the world. He said that it's because we just can't let God in.
Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, said, even if you could prove this God of the Bible to me, I still would not believe in him.
It's a matter of the will, not a matter of the mind.
Right.
Now, let me give you an example of how science doesn't say anything scientists do when it comes to, say, this concept of evolution. Because this is the big kind of elephant in the room when it comes to science. Well, you know, if God exists, or if evolution is true, God doesn't exist. First of all, that's nonsense. Evolution could be true and God still could exist, because evolution is about biology. It's not about the creation of the universe.
Right.
You need a creator and designer long before you get to life. But let's just leave that aside. When Richard Dawkins was asked by Philip Johnson, who wrote the book Darwin on Trial, why do you believe in evolution, macroevolution now, not microevolution? We all believe in microevolution.
Explain the difference.
Well, microevolution is the fact that creatures can adapt to their environment. And we all see that in antibiotic resistance, and we see that in many instances, even in dogs. You know, dog breeding, which takes intelligence to do, is an example of microevolution. The dog breeders always wind up with dogs, but they come up with different types of dogs. They don't break the genus of dogs. But macroevolution says that through natural forces, without intelligence, these genetic limits can be broken. And they are broken. They extrapolate from microevolution into macroevolution. And when Philip Johnson asked Richard Dawkins what's the best evidence he has for this, you know what Dawkins said? He said the best evidence we have for macroevolution is we have a common genetic code. Right. Well, DNA, right?
Right.
Well, notice the data doesn't tell him that evolution's true. He looks at the data, the common genetic code, and he then has to philosophically, using his reasoning skills, draw a conclusion.
Right.
And that's the conclusion he draws: a common ancestor. But here's the problem. That's not the only possibility. What's the other possibility?
A common designer.
Common designer, right, exactly. That could be the answer. But Dawkins has philosophically ruled that out in advance. So here he is trying to say that science tells us that we have a common ancestor because we have a common genetic code. But science doesn't tell us that at all. What science tells us is the raw data. We have a common genetic code. We then have to philosophically draw a conclusion.
Right.
And his conclusion is the result of his philosophical presupposition that intelligent causes aren't possible.
I can't remember what the study was, but I remember I was listening to the data done on a study, and I was listening to one radio station, and they said it proved one thing, and later that day I was listening to a different radio station, and they said it proved something the exact opposite. Further evidence that the raw data is just the raw data.
That's right.
But it has to be interpreted, and people tend to interpret it the way that they would want it to be interpreted.
That's right.
Sometimes.
That's right. Now, most of the scientific issues we're talking about here are what we call forensic science, or science of history. Like, we weren't there when the first life came into existence, or when we evolved supposedly from the first one-celled creature. So we have to look back and use clues using what's called the principle of uniformity, that causes in the past were like those in the present in order to figure out what happened.
Right.
Okay? And that's another principle that you can't prove by science. You have to assume it in order to do it, the principle of uniformity. But there are many things in science that we can go into a laboratory and repeat over and over again. And they're much more certain than how we got here. Right? Because we can go in the laboratory and do it over and over again. Like the law of gravity. You know, we can test the law of gravity in a laboratory and figure out exactly what its strength is. Right. So when it comes to that, it's a much more certain conclusion than when we look back into the history and try and figure out what our origins are. Right. So I don't want to say that all science is, well, people do say all science is tentative, and I guess to a certain extent they're right. But there are some scientific conclusions that I think are much more confirmed than others.
Right. Well, someone would say, and how do you respond to this, that if we can't trust science, then how can we know truth? What other options do we have in order to know truth, if not through science?
Well, I think we can trust science if we're objective and fair philosophically when we look at the evidence. I'm not saying we can't trust science, but I'm saying that in order to do science, these other philosophical tools and assumptions already need to be established, right? We don't learn everything from science. In fact, that's called scientism, that you get all truth from science.
Right.
In fact, there are many things you can't get from science. The laws of logic, I already pointed out. The law of causality, you have to assume it's true. Ethics, you can't get that from science. You can't come up with some scientific experiment to tell you that the Nazis were wrong. Right? That's something that's metaphysical, beyond the physical. It's not something you can test in a laboratory.
Right.
You can't test beauty in a laboratory. In fact, the amazing thing is that science itself can't be proved by science.
That's a good point, because the belief that science is the almighty arbiter of truth, that statement itself can't be proven through science.
No, of course not. You can't go in the laboratory and prove it.
Right.
And in fact, that's, again, science really, again, doesn't say a thing. Science is a method we use to discover cause-effect relationships, and then we have to make interpretations as to what these cause-effect relationships are. Right. So the scientist draws the conclusion.
Right.
Science doesn't draw the conclusion for you. The scientist draws the conclusion.
And further evidence for that is the fact that we have plenty of Christian scientists. We have plenty of scientists.
You don't mean Christian scientists in the not in the denomination.
No, not
You're talking about
not the religion.
Scientists who are Christians. I got it. Okay. All right.
So, and we have Nobel Prize winners who have discovered, wonderful and great things.
Oh, sure.
And they do not see any conflict. As a matter of fact, they look at the evidence and they say, this evidence is indicative of a creator.
Sure.
Not indicative of an accident.
Right. In fact, the very laws of nature themselves are indicative of a designer.
Right.
Why are the laws of nature so constant? Why are they so precise? Why, if you were to alter one of them slightly, would the entire universe not exist? And this is the fine-tuning argument for the existence of the universe. Why can we even have this discussion here, Harold?
Right.
Why is, as Einstein himself said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that the universe is comprehensible? Why can we even investigate the universe?
Right.
Certainly, atheism doesn't have an answer for this. If we're just molecules in motion, we can't know anything. We're just reacting. We're not reasoning.
Right.
So science is just a tool we use to help discover truths about the natural world. And we have to make interpretations and philosophical assumptions in order to do it.
Right. Well, now, how would you respond to someone who's saying, and if they said this, they really weren't really paying attention, that we were beating up on science because science have done really good things, I mean, cures for diseases, technology, so science is a good thing.
I'm sure it is, but it can be a bad thing too, right?
Right.
You can use science to create a nuclear weapon and destroy humanity,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Science is ethically neutral. Science is just a method we use to discover truths about the world, cause and effect relationships, but you can use it for good or evil.
Right. And there are plenty of scientists, though, that do, well, they sort of use science as a bully in order to bring across their philosophical
Sure they do.
position. As
Yes.
you were saying about Dawkins and people
Right.
like that, they would say, well, science tells us. No, science doesn't tell us.
Science doesn't tell us a thing. Scientists tell us
Right.
what
Exactly.
they think the truth is.
Right.
And in fact, I found back in July of 2010, there was an article that actually motivated me to do a session, a TV show on this. We have a TV show on DirecTV, channel 378, every Wednesday night at 9 Eastern. And the show we did was Science Doesn't Say Anything Scientists Do, because this article I read showed a dramatic increase in media statements that were authoritative about science. Like, for example, these statements would say, science says we should, science says this, science says we have to, science says this, that, and the other. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. And what they try and make it like science is some sort of God.
Yeah.
Science
yeah.
is just a method we use to discover truths about the world.
Right.
Cause and effect relationships.
Now, why do you think we have gotten to the point where we think science is the end all and be all?
Because we have air conditioning. Because we have refrigeration. Because we have these phones and we think it's cool, and it is. Because we have medical advances that help us live longer. But all we're doing is discovering cause and effect relationships about the natural world. That does not tell us
Right.
how the natural world came into existence, or whether anybody ever intervenes into the natural world, or
Yeah.
how we got here, or why our bodies are even alive. Science won't tell you that.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of amazed me when I worked at NASA is that there's an arrogance, well, not with all, because there were plenty of scientists who were Christians at NASA. I mean, there was a pretty significant Bible study right there at NASA when I was there. But there is some type of an arrogance among some of them that because we know how things work, then we've got all the answers.
Yeah, well, that's...
Which makes no sense when you think of, okay, I know how my car works, but that still doesn't explain how my car got put together.
That's right. But John Lennox makes that point in his book. He says, just because you figured out how an engine works doesn't mean you can get rid of Mr. Ford.
Right.
You know, the guy who created the engine and built it.
Right.
And just because you can figure out how things naturally occur with these precise natural forces in the world doesn't mean that there wasn't a creator of the natural forces and the world, and in fact somebody who's holding it together right now.
Right.
So this idea that science somehow gets rid of the need for God and a need for a creator is silly. It's like saying because I can figure out how a car works, I don't need a designer of the car.
Right. Now, we sort of touched on it. What are some of the limits of science?
Well, we touched on the ethics. It
Right.
can't tell you about ethics, can't tell you about philosophy, principles of logic, laws of nature, or I should say a law of causality. These are things that you have to bring to the table in order to do science. It can't tell us why we're here. The most important questions in life, science can't address.
You're right. Why are we
Can't tell us
here?
why are we here, how should we live then?
And what happens to us when we die?
Yeah, it can't tell us that.
Yeah. Now, how do you respond to someone who says that all knowledge can only be gained through the senses? which is why science, I think, is so popular, because we believe that if we can't see it, touch it, feel it, then it really doesn't exist.
Well,
and since science deals with those things, then science somehow brings us truth because it investigates those things.
Well, it does investigate those things, and it does bring truth, but not all truth. Because the very sentence that all truth comes from science, as you already pointed out, can't be proven by science. It's a philosophical claim. The laws of logic, as I just mentioned, can't be proven by science. So here they are making these, what they think are logical premises and logical arguments, but science can't prove those things. Science has to use those things.
Right.
Or I should say scientists have to use those things when they do science.
Even ideas.
Sure.
And we have scientists use things like categorization. They put
Sure.
things in category.
Right.
Well, that you can't weigh an idea.
Right.
You can't weigh a category.
That's right.
You can't weigh a color. You can't say how much does red weigh.
That's right. It's a
But
category
we know
mistake.
that the idea exists.
That's right.
Or else we wouldn't be able to ever talk about it. But science can't investigate the color red.
No. It can't tell you where it came from and why. Why is there color? We don't even know that.
Right.
We don't even know what energy is.
Right.
We don't even know what it is. We know what it does. We don't know what it is. You know, even the great physicist Richard Feynman says we don't even know what energy is. We don't even know. And science is not God.
Right.
Science is just a method we use again to discover cause and effect relationships in the natural world. Loose definition, but.
Well, Dr. Turek, we're coming to the end of the show. How can someone get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Go to crossexamined.org. That's crossexamined with a D on the end of it, .org. And we have a complete ministry there, which has a lot of articles and resources they can get. And I do a lot of speaking on college campuses, at churches. And so they can drop me an email there if they're interested in that kind of thing. And we have instructors. You've done presentations that I do. You can do presentations for us as well. And we have people all around the country that do this. So if people are interested in this kind of thing, and they should be, because we're called to know why we believe what we believe, and too many people are being talked out of Christianity because of bad ideas they get, and some of these bad ideas come from people who say science can define and discover everything. No, it can't.
Thank you, Dr. Frank Turek, for discussing this topic with me, that science doesn't say anything, scientists do, and that will end this episode of Giving an Answer. Be sure to join me again next time, and until then, goodbye, and God bless. You can find out more about Giving an Answer, as well as listen to other episodes by visiting us online at www.givingananswer.org.
Father, that lies in you, gotta let him know. Gotta let him know. Tell me ready to give an answer. Gotta let him know. And there's a father up your head.